Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Matt Bailey. I'm the National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. I've probably said that too many times by now because you've seen me go live every single night. And that's, excluding some weekends, but most nights of the week I go active online. I go live with you guys doing a live stream every night, which I absolutely love doing because it's a chance for us to catch up, to talk some whiskey, to meet fascinating people, and to be something really special for the whiskey community that is the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. I love what this club represents in Australia just as much as our state manager for Queensland, Scott Mansfield. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being along with us tonight.
No problem. How's it going, Matt?
I'm going well. It's hump day. It's Whiskey Wednesdays, if you like. How are you going?
Absolutely. Oh, great, mate. It's we're having a really cold spell up here. So
did you say cold for Queensland?
Well, cold for Queensland. We start wearing jumpers when it's about 23, 24 degrees.
It's like it's the opposite of like when you talk to people in the UK about summer. And as soon as it gets to 20 degrees in the UK, it's like everyone loses their mind. I love it.
Oh, yeah. I've been having arguments about my relatives in Scotland. They've been saying, oh, beautiful weather, going out, getting a tan. And I say, what's the temperature? And they say, 22. And it's like, I haven't got rid of my jumper at that stage.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Well, I'm wearing one tonight because it's been cold the last couple of days here in Sydney. But I really appreciate you taking your midweek out of your working week to be involved.
Problem.
There's a few things I want to cover off tonight. Of course, one of the big ones, the real meat and potatoes of it all, is talking a bit more in depth and learning a bit more about your article in this month's outturn for Lindores Abbey and your family connection and all that kind of stuff involved. But I want to start a little bit with the question I like to ask most people about your whiskey journey, where it all started, where it all came from. What was your light bulb moment, your epiphany in it all?
Someone asked me what was the first whiskey I ever had, and I have to honestly say it's impossible to know because I'm the son of a Scot, and I'm of a certain vintage that Bonjela wasn't necessarily used when we were teething. I'm pretty sure that the first time I came across whiskey was when I was getting my first teeth, and as a kid, if I was ever sick, I would have a hot toddy. But if you want to talk about appreciating whiskey for what it is, up until 30, I drank any old average stuff. I did spend in my 21st year, I lived in Scotland for about 6 months and went up and visited Edgedour, and I got a little bit of an appreciation of single malts there. But I think it took to my 30th birthday. I was living up in Gladstone, and I thought, well, I've got a little bit of coin now. Should do something to really enjoy my 30th birthday, and I bought myself a bottle of 21-year-old Glenfarclas.
Very cool.
Yep, and that really sort of set things in train. And I got a transfer back to Brisbane, and a friend of my mother's was a member of a whiskey club up here, the Queensland Malt Whisky Society, and he took me along. And
big shout out to QMWS, some of which are watching tonight, which is great.
And things sort of progressed from there. I got involved in the club as the club secretary, and Peter Johnston, my predecessor in a number of different clubs, including the Scotch Malt Whisky Society as well, of course. He took me in under his wing, and eventually I became the assistant lead taster in the City Club, became the lead taster of it, and I was hooked. And it's been a good 12-year journey of leading tastings in, 3 different clubs now. The 2, at one point it was the Scotch Malt Whisky Society plus 2 Queensland Malt Whisky Societies. So it's been a journey.
Yeah, I bet. And throughout that period, like since your 30th, I should say, I guess you could say you've had a range of whiskey epiphanies over the years.
Absolutely.
Like moments. And like, even like you say, with Edgedour being one of them and Glenfarclas being another. Edgedour was actually one of my first as well. It was I think I can safely say that Edgedour was the very first distillery I toured.
Yep. Ditto.
Yeah. And that back bar at the distillery is unbelievable. So, well, at least it was when I visited.
Not sure that they had that when I was there. That was 91, so we're going a bit back there.
Yeah, no, I'm just talking like 2008 or something.
I mean, I've had a few epiphanies. One of the things that really captured my attention at the City Club of the Queensland Malt Whisky Society was we were fortunate enough to have a Lord of the Isles.
Yeah, very cool.
Isles. And that blew my mind. And I started to really appreciate a good peated whiskey and became a bit of a peat head. And it became a long-held ambition of mine to visit Islay. And about 5 years ago, I got that opportunity to do that. And it was a religious experience. We got there and I was there with my wife and we had a baby and a 5-year-old. So I'm still in whiskey debt to my wife for transporting me while looking after the 2 children. But there was one very special day, and it was actually the day before the bicentennial celebrations at Lefroy, where she dropped me off at Lefroy and I did a tasting there, and that was awesome. I got my rent and I finished my tour there, and I walked
square foot
the mile to Lagavulin. And what shocked me about Lagavulin was that if you go inside, we've all heard of Malt Mill. And, we know about the famous sort of little sample. And you go in there and it's the cheapest looking china cabinet that you've ever seen. And you look at it and say, that's the Malt Mill bottle there. So had a bit of a tasting there. But the
tasting of Lagavulin, I presume, not of Malt Mill.
Well, Malt Mill at Lagavulin. And of course, there's always that little story about.
Yeah.
So I met up with a couple of Danish guys there and we got to talking, and I said to them, I'll meet you at the steps of the round kirk at Bowmore. And that's sort of a little bit later on in the story. But by that stage, I'd had a few. And I turned up 15 minutes late for my tour for Ardbeg. And there was this really officious Englishman there, and I hope he doesn't see this, but he said, you can't go. You can't do the tour. You haven't done the workplace health and safety sort of spiel there. And I was absolutely gutted.
Yeah.
And the woman in the shop saw me go out into the courtyard looking, devastated. And she sort of said, come with me. And she snuck me into the tour, and we did the tour, and we went through and we saw the still house and had a drink of the pot ale, and went off to a warehouse tasting. It was brilliant. And it had been a long day, and it had been a dream for years and years to go there. And we're walking away, and it's Margaret Heads, Mickey Heads' wife, doing the tour.
Oh, that's very cool.
And she asked, just as a bit of an aside, and we're finishing off the tour and leaving, saying, how do you, have you had a good day? And I said, I really love Ardbeg. And I burst into tears. And she gave me this huge hug, and we had some photos there. And what it said to me was that it's not just about the whiskey. And God knows I love Ardbeg.
Yeah.
The people as well. And when you get to meet the people who make the whiskey and you understand the relationships that they build with each other and people like us, the whiskey geeks, and that's a really big moment. And I think that's been really informative for me in the last 5 years. Is you can have the whiskey, but you can't have the crack without the people. And that's one of the things I love about this society. We've got some awesome people.
Yeah, we really do. It's the members that make it, as I sometimes say. It's we can have all these fantastic single casks, but if we don't have anyone to share them with, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And that's why I love what we do at the society. If not to talk too much on brand about it, but it's true. It's why I love being in this role, and why I've been a part of it now for 5 years as brand ambassador. But speaking of the people, let's head into topic. Let's talk about some of the history and some of the background of Lindores Abbey.
Sure.
And actually, I also want to get onto, before we get onto Lindores Abbey. Actually, there was one other small question which I wanted to ask you about what does the whiskey community look like to you in Queensland? Because you're the Queensland State Manager. As for those who have just tuned in, we're speaking with Scott Mansfield, the Queensland State Manager for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. So what does the Queensland whiskey scene look like? And you mentioned QMWS before. Can you weave that in there a bit?
Yeah, I think it's been a bit of a journey for whiskey fans in Queensland, in the sense that the Queensland Malt Whisky Society has been around for about 22 years. And that's been an exploration of standard bottlings, and given the chance, get some of the independent bottlings in, get some interesting novelty whiskies in. And for a large part, there's 8 clubs. There's Rocky, Townsville, and there's 6 in Queensland, including my one, which is the Redlands. It's been a place where you can share quality whiskies, but it's also been a fantastic resource for educating people new to whiskey. And it serves a fantastic function that way. There is a small collector community, but they really don't make a big...
Collector, did you say, sorry?
Yeah, collector community. They really don't make a big show and tell about it. But, there are a few little groups who convene on occasion, and, you'll bring a bottle and share it. But it's a little bit of an odd community, in the sense that I really do think, and a few of the people I've talked to say that living in Queensland is genuinely a factor. And if you look at summer versus winter, there's a little bit more interest in whiskey in winter, and I'm happy to be corrected on that by any of our viewers tonight. But for a large part, some of the whiskey interest sort of falls away in summer, simply because when it's 35 degrees and humid, sometimes people have a little bit more interest in some of the colder amber liquids,
like 4X.
Yeah.
That was a
I don't know
Come on.
I don't know if there's much overlap between our society members and 4X drinkers. I'll stand corrected.
All right, let's move on to Lindores. Yeah, no, you're going to get in trouble from the 4X crowd if there is one. Okay, so first of all, I want to ask how did this art? You've written a brilliant article in Outturn about Lindores Abbey, the history of the site, which I want to dig into. But can we start with asking, how did the article even come about?
Well, my late mother came from this town in Newborough, which is in the northwest of Fife. So what you've got to imagine is that you've got basically the Tay opening up at this point, and you can actually look across and you can see Dundee, and you're about 25 minutes from Perth. But it's one of these towns that really doesn't draw too much attention to itself for maybe its intrinsic beauty or activities, and it's where my family comes from. And I've got if I walk down the main street of Newborough now, and it's only 2,100 people, I can guarantee that I'll run into somebody who's either a cousin or a cousin of a cousin and the like. So I've been there, 3 times in my life: when I was 21 on my honeymoon, and 5 years ago. And when we were there last time, my cousin took me for a bit of a walk around town, and he introduced me to this chap called Drew Mackenzie Smith. And I'd heard of Lindores Abbey, but I'd never actually made the connection between Lindores Abbey and this ruin that's at the end of town in Newborough. And my cousin Donald took me in and introduced me to Drew. And Drew told me about how he had this proposal to build a distillery as a continuation, a homage to the site where we've got the first recorded reference to whiskey being produced in Scotland. And
see, that for me alone is just an incredible part of this story. As you wrote in the article, for those playing along at home, in 1494 it is recorded that the Royal Exchequer rolls that King Henry IV had commissioned 8 bowls of malt to Friar John Core, wherewith to make aquavitae. So that year that you often hear ambassadors say that Scotch whiskey's origins sit around 1494 as a year, comes from an area that is closely associated with your family.
Yeah, I mean, it's as close as my uncle during World War II delivered milk from the farm that was Lindores Abbey Farm. When you come from a town of 2,000 people and your heritage goes back to the 1600s, you're pretty well guaranteed to have some form of connection to, obviously not maybe the monks themselves, although who knows, but absolutely guaranteed to have forebears who worked either in the orchards or staff during the time of this abbey before it sort of went into ruin.
Yeah.
And the other thing about it is that a little bit like, I think it's in Rothes, there's a distillery right next to a graveyard. And if you go into Newborough, its main drag is parallel to the flow of the Tay River. And if you go down to the end, at the end of the town on the right-hand side is the graveyard, and it's at a foot of a hill, and the sweep of the fields goes down, and you can see the ruins and now the distillery of Lindores Abbey. So I can actually go there, and I will go back there again because I've got a little bit of a mission to go to that graveyard. And I can stand at my great-grandparents' gravestone, and I can look straight at that distillery, and I can go, that's my distillery. That's my family heritage. I've got a link to that place that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years.
I mean, that's just incredible when you think about it, because there's so many distilleries where, they were founded in, early to mid 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s. That's very cool. It's like, and you still meet people very rarely, but here and there, who've been associated with those distilleries in their family, have been for many, many years. In fact, I'm going to get it's Andrew, as a young chap named Andrew, who works at the Vaults in Leith at the spiritual home of the SMWS, who he started work at the Vaults after he was doing a little bit of work at Abbey Distillery. I said, "Oh, what was it like working at Abbey?" And he goes, "Oh, fine. My dad works there, and my grandfather used to work there, and my great grandfather used to work there. So I did a bit of work there." It's like, that's incredible. Like you meet people like that, but for the mere fact that your family lineage can line back to something that is the birthplace of Aqua Vitae is unbelievably cool.
Yeah,
it's a spiritual connection with the land and the spirit, which is something you can't make that up. It's
And the great thing about it is that, when you go back to those very old distilleries, for one of being controversial, there really is a concept of terroir that connects to the product from those distilleries, because they are a reflection of the grain that's grown there, and the grain at Lindores Abbey now is from the two local farms that are nearby. There's a reflection of the people who work there. So in a sense, having that connection for me is very important, because I lost my mother about 14 months ago, and when you lose a parent, it actually orients you to think about, what is it that I can make a connection to for my children. I'd love to think that my two girls one day will be able to go to Lindores Abbey, and they will be able to say that this place has a linkage to not just my passion, that a linkage to their mother who was born their grandmother who was born 400 meters away from there, but they can find connection back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah. That's very cool. And you have obviously a good friendship with Drew Mackenzie Smith, who, look, it took 20 years from the formation to now, but he's built the Lindores Abbey Distillery.
Yep.
And I think that's a true milestone of bringing whiskey back to where it came from. And I can't think of any other more, what's the word for it? A more genuine reason for being.
Yeah.
And that's something that's often discussed now in more contemporary whiskey discussions, reason for being.
I sort of look at it. I'm a history teacher by the old day job, my profession. And one of the things about history is that history, in some senses, is like a foreign land, but we always look at it through the perspective of our own modern context. So in that sense, it's an act of creation in respect to something that has gone by the way. So, if you look at the Aqua Vitae, of an Aqua Vitae is you know, it's something different within the Scottish whiskey community in the sense that we all know that building a distillery is incredibly expensive and the return takes decades.
Yeah, decades sometimes. And I mean, one of the cool things that I from the discovery of your article was the number of people that have helped shape that distillery and shape the spirit, shape the casks, all that kind of thing. Like you listed, Drew listed Ken Robertson, Dr. Alan Rutherford, Anthony Wills from Kilhoman, Richard Patterson from Dalmore, Keith Steele from Glenmorangie, and of course, Dr. Jim Swan, the late Dr. Jim Swan, who was integral in shaping their spirit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you think about it and you ask yourself, and I actually asked him when I was there 5 years ago, I said, how are you going to decide what you want your whiskey to be like? You know, what is the process that you go through there? And I imagine every distillery goes through that of, how do I produce something that is authentic, that is marketable, that is obviously a quality product? So Jim Swan came in, and the sad irony is that he died on the day that he was supposed to come and be there at the topping ceremony for the actual distillery. And obviously that they've had some really in-depth conversations there. And one of the things that's interested me is that, one of the great things I love about this society is that we're always looking to honor great taste. And we are not going to be hidebound by the conventions of, Islay has to be super peaty and a Lowlander has to be light and fruity. And
it's one of the things we do differently at the society. It's one of the things we really truly do differently is not hiding behind convention or having to be bound to expectation on that.
If it's good, we're going to enjoy it.
That's right.
And he said that if you go back and you look at the records, and fortunately monks were very good record keepers, they actually had rights to access peat from a local loch, ironically called Ladybank, not that Ladybank.
Ladybank, yes, right.
There is an argument to say that once they started to produce something that was more definably what we would now call whiskey, it may very well have been as peated as a Lafroig. So that
was an interesting comment in the article about how it could be. They don't know. Obviously, there's no records of that, but and there was no measurement of ppm or anything like that made at that time. It was just, we're peating this barley, and I think that the history behind the barley on that is quite interesting. But I'll get back to that in just a second. Taking some of the comments and questions coming through live. Daniel Mathers says, agree with everything Scott said about QMWS. It's all about education, promoting whiskey in general, and above all, sharing with like-minded people. Sounds like the mission statement of SMWS. You're just missing one letter at the beginning. It starts with a Q instead of an S, but we'll forgive you, Daniel. No, I'm just kidding. Love you, mate. And Robert Akers says, the photo in the article has lots of lovely glass. How much has the visitor experience shaped the planning?
I think it's been absolutely crucial. And if you look into the article, the original intention, when Drew discovered that here's this linkage to...
He's, of course, referencing all the glass in the structure there, yeah.
He thought about it as being a visitor centre before a distillery. And that particular image, to sort of orient people, there's a small laneway that goes right in front of the distillery. And the glass there looks out onto the ruins of what remains of the distillery. And if you have a look at their packaging, the actual distillery itself is huge. What remains is probably something around maybe 2/3 of a football field. We've got a few walls here and there, but the distillery looks out onto the remains of the ruins, and there's a few graves that are there, and then looks beyond that out onto the town, and you get a bit of a view of the Tay as well.
Question: what are you dramming on?
This is just about my last remains of Aquavitae. Maybe we should talk
Lindores Abbey. There you go.
So, I guess we were talking about gin before. how often, or we were going to talk about gin, how often distilleries will turn to a spirit like gin to the till ticking over.
Yep.
Drew said he wasn't going to do that. And he actually wanted to have something that would have a linkage to what aqua vitae would be. And of course, when we talk about whiskey, it's a construct. It is, it's not an immutable product. It has changed, and probably, who knows, 50, 60, 100 years, it'll be slightly different regulations about it. But back in 1494, aqua vitae's distilled spirit from barley infused with local herbs and spices. And so we've got an aqua vitae there. And if you go to the distillery, the first thing you do when you go in there is they'll take you into what they call the apothecary. And you can have a look at playing around with some spirit and make your own aqua vitae. So this is where it all started from. And it's as best an approximation that they can make, with a few additions, because they found that they needed a little bit of sweetness, and they've got that from some herbs and spices that they picked up from France.
The Colonel's secret recipe.
Yeah,
herbs and spices. Matt Wooler asks, are you both trying to match your shelves in the background? Is this SMWS Australia styling going on?
I think we've got a bit of IKEA advertising going on.
Which is what the next comment was. Robert Akers says it was a bulk deal at IKEA. It feels like that's befitting of the budget. So we've both got the same shelving, and it's filled.
Yeah, it's exactly the same.
It's even filled with similar things, whiskey and books and all sorts of nonsense in the back, of course, and a few magazines. Very cool. I mean, that's. But going back to I just want to touch on the point of barley that we were about to touch on before as well. It's Park Hill that they get their barley from now, isn't it?
There's two local farms. There's Park Hill and Howissons. And Howissons, both of them are actually Drew's great-grandfather.
And they're floor malting, are they, on site?
No. They're sending it off to a maltster. But it's malt from those two farms. So it's within 400 meters. So it's not single origin, but it is pretty well, field to distillery.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Another question coming through is, where is Scott's butane torch?
Butane torch.
Well, I mean, I'll send him one. It's fine. Matt Waller asks, would the farms be aligned in grain strains?
Yes. They started off with a strain of Concerto. I think it was Concerto 17, went to Concerto 18, and I think they're on a strain of Optic now. Optic
being one of the more popular strains, of course. But I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with. I'm pretty sure the society has a pretty strong relationship with them as well, so that might be something we can expect in years to come, coming through the SMWS in a new code, of course. But I always encourage members not to be code hunters.
I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about the society, Australian society connection with Lindores Abbey, is that their sourcing of casks has been rather creative, and they've got a lot of sherry, if I'm allowed to say that now, sherry casks and port casks from Yalumba.
Yeah,
and other red wines. So they're actually doing
a pair of casks
going into Australia. A pair of casks. Yeah. A fair bit of their distillates going into Australian source casks, and part of their logic behind that is they're saying, well, as is the case pretty well universally, not that many people are drinking sherry these days.
Yes.
Or Pera. And there are some extremely old casks that they can access from Yalumba. So
very cool.
Something to look out for.
Very cool indeed. A question from your friend in Queensland, Tim Grant asks, question for Scott on his Desert Island dram. He says, he asks, is it 70s Ardbeg or is it future Lindores Abbey single malt? But it might be something different entirely. So what is your Desert Island dram?
I've often thought, and I know Mark Gillespie does this on Whiskey Cask, what's going to be your last whiskey that you had? And I'm not going to be particularly ostentatious. I would say if I had to have my last whiskey, it'd be an Ardbeg 10 or an Ugadale. But if I was stuck on a desert island, I mean, I'd love to have a Lindores Abbey.
Sure.
But there are a few out there, and this is one of the great things about going on a whiskey journey is, I was your traditional peat head, and give me anything with lots of peat. But two of the best whiskies that I've ever had weren't necessarily particularly peaty at all. I absolutely loved Rosebank Flora and Fauna.
Great whiskey. And
probably the other greatest whiskey I ever had, another Australian connection, was Shane Kalurian's Springbank PSI, the first edition. Unbelievable whiskey.
Yeah, I think it's an unbelievable whiskey as well, but I'm one of those people that thinks the second edition was just somewhat better.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I'm more than happy for any volunteers want to share some of that my way. To you.
Mo Waller says SMWS rum for him. Is that your desert island, Waller? I don't know what that's in reference to, but yeah, there is some rum actually in June Outturn. There's a casual little
1.5.
That's right. Oh, something's happened there. Okay, yeah, some R1.5. It's a it's the first rum distillery that worked with the SMWS, of course, and there it is, Jamaican rum, a little extravagant. I've tasted it, and it's also in the pack. In the sample pack. Scott, what have you got in the top left there? On your top right. Or your I can't work it out.
Here we go. It's a little extravagant.
Yes, there you go. So that's it. That's one of the samples in the June box. Scott, as a state manager, already has a box on hand, but you can grab that box this Friday. Scott, do you have any outturn tips for before we if we finish up for the night?
This particular outturn or in general?
Well, just in general, in terms of getting outturn underway.
Well, one of the things I'm on the lookout for is I've got a 10-year-old and I've got a 5-year-old, and I'm always looking at those date distilled on any cask offerings because, I'm turning.
What year was the 5-year-old born? What year was 5-year-old?
She was born 2014, 23rd of December.
2014.
Yeah.
Oh, well, the Dreamers Drams are 2014, but it's not the right month. That's January 2014, so it's almost a year out. But
so I'm desperately looking for something so that come their 21st, I'll pull out this whiskey and say, this was made on the day that you were born. So that's always a great thing to look at. And I don't think anyone does that. And it's great to be able to say, this whiskey shares my birthday, and I've been saving it for a special occasion. So that's my outturn little tip. I certainly always on the lookout for that.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. I mean, it's the rule is that the older you are, the harder it is to get your birth year whiskey. Everyone knows that one.
Tell me about it.
And when you finally try your birth year whiskey, and sometimes it's not very good, it's like, well, it wasn't a great year for whiskey sometimes, in my case anyway. Scott, I really want to take just a moment to thank you so much for having a chat with us tonight and talking a bit more in depth about your article on Lindores Abbey. It's been fantastic. So thanks.
It's been a pleasure.
And I'm looking forward to the next Queensland events for members coming up online soon as restrictions start lifting around the country. We already had a chat about
bars are opening.
The bars are
opening. We're looking for opportunities. So hopefully it won't be too far off.
That's exactly right. And thanks to all the questions. Thanks everyone for all the questions tonight. There's been some great ones. And of course, tomorrow night, it still said TBC on the screen, but it means we've got something planned, which is the night before Outturn. We'll see you at 7 o'clock tomorrow. Of course, thank you again. Thanks to Scott again for all of his efforts and for sharing your incredible family history with our members. And we'll see you all again tomorrow night. Thank you, everyone, so much for being a part of this.
Thanks very much.